Like you rightly said, things are really heating up in the United States, and right here in Kenya, of course, we are keenly monitoring, like the whole world is, everybody is keenly monitoring events in the United States. That election clearly has a lot of stake. The results of that election is being keenly monitored. And this morning I have the pleasure of having Mr. Tom Wolf, himself an American citizen and a lead researcher with Ipsos, to help us just put perspective and context into that Republican convention that is going down in Cleveland. Things seem to be really heating up there in Cleveland, Mr. Wolf, with Melania Trump this morning.
Yes, thank you. Nice to be here. I did wake up around 4 o'clock last night just to watch a little bit, to get a taste of it, since you had invited me to be here. I was home for a month from mid-May to mid-June and had a chance to catch up a bit, because here, of course, as you know, I'm very busy with you Kenyans, so I don't have that much time to follow things as carefully as when I'm at home. So I'm a little bit fresher on these recent developments than I was 2 months ago, but still no expert. But I'd be happy to answer, to the best that I can, any questions that you might have. Most
certainly, and that's why we are talking about Mr. Trump, this very divisive figure in American politics, this shrewd businessman. But his wife comes out today, you know, with very nicely put together words as a kind, a soft and caring gentleman. Do you agree?
Well, of course, I don't know Mr. Trump personally, never met him and so on, but I think we can see this performance by his wife as a rather typical one for such a convention. Among the Democrats also, reference has been made, whether plagiarized or not, to Michelle Obama's speech in 2008 at the Democratic Convention. And especially in this case for Mr. Trump, because according to, I think, all the polls that have been done, he's polling much lower among women than among men, and that applies also to white women. He's polling the best, strongest among white men. So it's I'm sure it was decided, and she may have given such a speech anyway, but quite important to at least dilute the concerns, hostilities that many people, even who identify, women who identify themselves as Republican, by having his wife come out and make a very kind and mild, sort of praising statement about her husband. Of course, it's only when the convention is over, after Thursday, these things go on for 4 days, and of course, ending with Donald Trump's speech himself on Thursday night, that the polls will indicate whether this convention has produced a bump or an increase in the polls for him. And as you were just suggesting, yes. And then after the following week, when the Democrats have theirs, so any polls that have been conducted before today, we really have to wait and see. And especially, although we could get into this later, because whereas in the last week, Donald Trump made known his choice for his vice presidential running mate, the Indiana governor, Mike Pence, which was very strategic in terms of the content of the Republican Party, we still don't know who Hillary Clinton is going to pick. And that will be an extremely important choice for her also in terms of both consolidating support within the Democratic Party base or Democratic followers, and also responding. In a way, she has an advantage because she let Trump go first. So we'll really have to wait until both of these conventions are over and then see what the polls say about what their impact was, if any.
We'll talk about Mike Pence and his choice and Trump's choice for the running mate a little later. But first, still talking about the issues of immigration and Donald Trump's wife herself, an immigrant, and knowing the extreme views that Donald Trump has had over the issue of immigration and security, coming at a time when America is really struggling with its issues of security, where we now see police also now being like this, the proverbial story of the hunter being the hunted now. What sort of synergies are we seeing here? Is Trump trying to say that, yes, he is mellowing towards his hardline stance on immigration?
I doubt it. I didn't hear the whole of her remarks, and we'll have to wait and see what Trump says himself in his speech on Thursday. I mean, he and the people around him who've built his campaign have known that the fear of immigration has been a very positive stance for him to take. And of course, it has two aspects. One is strictly an economic or a labor one, where the main target of his remarks are the labor migrants from Mexico and Central and South America, competing with Americans for jobs, although actually doing many low-paid jobs that Americans prefer not to do, often manual labor. And then, of course, the other one of immigration from Muslim countries, whether refugees or people who came even before the disastrous events over the last decade or so in Iraq and or even Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria now. So I think the fact that his wife, and of course this is his third wife, happens to be an immigrant herself. I mean, certainly because they were married some time ago, no one could say that he married an immigrant woman.
Years.
That's right, just to mollify those who are upset about his immigration views. But probably he and the people around him would say it's fortunate, it doesn't hurt, because as you say, some people, especially his opponents, have used his very strong remarks about immigrants, deporting Muslims, building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and somehow trying to force the Mexican government to pay for it. It makes him look less irrational or less nasty to have a wife who actually is not American born. So that probably doesn't hurt. But I'm sure whoever his wife was, whether wife number one, wife number two, or this one, would have been brought out on the first night to give a speech in support of her husband anyway. Okay,
and talk about the divisive nature of Mr. Trump. I know you probably have had an opportunity to visit, or rather to attend conventions in the past. What would you say is different, significantly different when you look at this one? Just comparing, I was seeing a lot of massive protests yesterday against Trump. Of course, they failed. The protesters failed to stop, any further engagement, or rather the party from going forward to nominate Mr. Trump.
Well, that's a very interesting and very important question, and we could spend hours talking about the difference over the years in these conventions. Just to highlight a couple of points. First of all, I've only attended one, and that was the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City in New Jersey. You're going to see how old I am now. In 1964, when I was a college student, and I was a volunteer. And that was extremely interesting, especially in comparison with the conventions now, even on the Republican side, for one very, very important reason. Although there are many, the way the media is handled and so on and so forth. But in terms of the rules, in the 60s until about the mid-70s, both of the political parties selected their candidates at the convention. Yes, there were a few primaries, but they were not legally binding. We didn't have nearly the amount of polling that we have now also. So that, for example, after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in '63 and his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, took over, there was a great deal of sympathy within the party for the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, who was John F. Kennedy's younger brother. And there was a kind of a groundswell within the party to take away the nomination from Johnson, even if he had served in the presidency for a year after JFK's assassination. Now, at that convention, and as I say, in '64, I was there, they had made a documentary about John F. Kennedy to show the delegates, to stir their emotions, rally them, given the fact that Johnson had tried to the best of his ability, and quite successful, in the wake of Kennedy's assassination, to pursue in the Congress some of Kennedy's legislative objectives, especially in civil rights. And the fact that Johnson was a Southerner from Texas, where even within the Democratic Party in those days there was a lot of resistance to civil rights for African Americans, Johnson was emerging as someone who surprised many people with the level of his commitment to push this civil rights agenda, which came to fruition especially in the Civil Rights Act of 1965 after he was reelected. But the point was, they had to hold off showing that film about JFK's life until after the convention had officially nominated Lyndon Johnson, because there was a fear or an expectation that emotions would have been so high after showing that film that the delegates would have switched their support to Robert Kennedy. And so when they finished showing that film, and the stadium, the lights came on, and Robert Kennedy was standing alone on the stage, there was applause, nonstop applause, for about 40 minutes. It was the longest applause I've ever seen in my life, and most of the people around me were crying. And it was clear, as I said, if that film had been shown before Johnson had been given the official nomination, it would have switched to Bobby Kennedy. Now, in these days, of course, we've seen since the 70s, for various reasons we don't have time to get into, both parties have moved to primaries in the 50 states that lock in most of their delegates by the political party regulations to support the person who gets the votes in those primaries, at least for the first round. And we know on both sides there's a certain threshold you have to have.
But either way, Mr. Wolf, it looks like the journey towards that nomination has always remained a contested affair on both sides of the political divide. Bernie Sanders, on the Democratic side, has openly called for a review of the nomination rules.
Absolutely.
The Republicans are not happy either, with, of course, Donald Trump being the only man standing from a crowded field of 17. So is it time that the U.S. looked at its nomination rules?
Well, people in these parties will make those decisions. I mean, you identify several very, very important issues. The first one is that each of the parties have their own rules. There is no national election law. Parties, in fact, only have legal identity in the United States at the level of the 50 states. We don't have any Political Parties Act or anything like that. So although it varies a bit from state to state, I can say in general that whereas on the Democratic side, in their party nominations, or what we call primaries, the delegates that are apportioned from each state, mainly based on population, are given out in proportion to the percentage of the vote that each candidate gets. On the Republican side, it's largely a winner-take-all system.
For the benefit of time, I think I need to hurry us through this. What do you make of the GOP, the establishment GOP faces, like the former presidents, George Bush, missing this Republican convention? Yeah.
Let me be very quick in finishing the last point. We know on the Republican side, of all the votes that were cast in the nominations, Trump only got 40%. But he kept winning one state after another because, as you said, he was up against so many traditional established politicians, people holding public office, which Trump never has. So he could win a state with 25 or 30% of the vote because the other 5, 6, 7 candidates were dividing the other 70 or 60% of the vote. And on the Democratic side, because it was more proportional, Sanders could keep going almost to the end and only finally failing to block Hillary Clinton from getting the number of votes. And that's why he's making these claims now, because on the Democratic side, they've had these extra delegates called superdelegates that were not bound by any votes at the primary level.
So do we expect a nomination for Trump at the end of the 4 days?
Oh, absolutely. There's no way they can take it away from him. On your last question, which is also very important, why have we seen this remarkable situation at the Republican convention with neither the last Republican president being there, George Bush, nor some of the major candidates that he was competing against for the nomination, nor either of the two candidates of the Republican Party in the last two presidential elections, Mitt Romney or John McCain. And that is because of the way that Trump won this nomination and the fact that coming from outside of politics and the kind of person that he is, more of a media star, that established politician, the things that he was saying during the campaign that runs against many of the deepestly held principles of the mainstream Republican Party, that's why they're not there. Now, whether they'll actually vote for Hillary Clinton, they probably won't campaign for her, because these people who are objecting to Trump, even up to now in the Republican Party, and they're expecting, many of them, Hillary Clinton to win. They want the Republicans to maintain control over the House of Representatives and the upper house, the Senate. So they will try, I don't know how successful they'll be, to separate their Republican campaigns going forward, leaving Trump to get on basically on his own with his presidential campaign and his very fervent supporters, while they're trying to preserve the Republican majorities in the legislative branch so as to provide their own tyranny of numbers against an executive, which as of now at least is likely to be held by a Democrat. But things are so fluid, the situation is so new, Trump is appealing to people who've never even voted before, it's very possible that Clinton could lose.
A very polarized house, Mr. Wolf, and I think we'll keenly be following events there, and I think you can't have put it any better, especially when you're looking at this interesting read I have in front of me here by Mike Lofgren, who is saying that the party is actually over, how the Republicans went crazy, the Democrats became useless, and the middle class got what? Shafted.
It's a good book, I recommend it.
That really sums up events in the US, and I think we'll be following up the events over the Republican convention as well.